This is a real pleasure for me to introduce Emily Harris to you. I heard Emily a couple of months ago, I'm not sure exactly when it was, in San Mateo County, making a presentation to a political club there. And before she was very far into her presentation, I knew that I was going to invite her to make this presentation. Actually, when I go to most any meeting, I'm cruising for prospects to make presentations to this meeting, but this one was a particular pleasure. I think and I think it's clear that we're facing a crisis. This country has about 5% of the world's population. We have about 25% of the world's prisoners. In California, the situation has become so bad that the federal courts have said you've got to reduce the population in your prisons. The medical care for patients, inmates, was so bad the federal government took it over, appointed someone to run it, and said you will fund it. We're in a particularly propitious moment right now. For this presentation, the governor presented his proposed budget just a few days ago. It has some good things. It has some bad things. If I were grading him, I'd probably flunk him. But it does have some opportunities. So it is a good moment to be applying pressure. We've certainly had opportunity to learn about this issue with AB 109, realignment of the criminal justice system, which has a lot to say about the way we treat prisoners, how we fail to treat prisoners. So I am really delighted to present Emily. I know nothing about her personally, except she went to the University of Michigan for a couple of years, long after I did. And she's escaped to the warm weather from Michigan. But I know that she's good when she's talking about this topic. So it's a pleasure to present Emily Harris.
Okay, so can we do a sound? How's the sound? Thumbs up if the sound's working. Okay, great, perfect. I haven't used one of these before, so it's a little funny. What's that? Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to Paul and to the Humanists of Silicon Valley for having me. It's a pleasure to be in San Mateo. I've been doing a lot of organizing in the county for the last several years, fighting your sheriff here and trying to fight the jail expansion plan that they're doing in Redwood City, which I'll talk to about a little bit later. I'm going to start sort of big picture talking about what's happening nationally and in California, and then talk a little bit more specifically about what's happening in Redwood City, and then bring up Natalie, a friend of mine who had helped with the fight here in the county, who'll talk a little bit about her experience working with the group fighting the jail in San Mateo. And then I'm really open to question and answer. And I know a lot of times people are, with prison and prison issues, there's hard questions. I'm really comfortable with hard questions, so feel free, any of the ones that are a little bit uncomfortable, I'm totally fine with those. So we'll have some questions and open it up for discussion towards the end. So, and then if there's anything that's unclear, if I don't give enough of an explanation, you want to just raise your hand, I'm happy to elaborate on anything. So I'm the statewide coordinator for CURB, and CURB is a coalition of 50 organizations, mostly California-based, working to reduce the number of people in prison, the number of prisons in the state, and we're trying to prevent further expansion of the system. So we see that if we build more cages, we're going to fill them, and so any of the type of parole and sentencing reform that we believe California needs to initiate aren't going to happen if we build more prison or jail beds. So we have a platform, and these are the three main demands on the platform: to stop all prison and jail expansion, to reduce the prison and jail population, and then we see a very significant part of our work around stopping the amount of resources that we invest in locking people up, and believe that we need to be reinvesting that money to alternatives to incarceration and to other types of programming that helps create a strong, healthy California for everybody. So we know in the last, decade, we've seen our social safety net experiencing tremendous cuts because of budget cuts, and yet at the same time, we've continued to invest more money into incarceration. So we believe it's not just about alternatives specifically for the population of people who are locked up, but also around investing in affordable housing or public transportation or education for everybody, because we believe that's how we actually build a strong, safe, healthy community. So talking sort of on a global scale. This gives you a sense of, I think it's probably a little bit blurry for folks in the back, but this is the United States. Then we've got France, Italy, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland. And this gives you a little bit of an example of where the U.S. is. We house 25% of the world's prisoners. We are addicted to incarceration, and California is one of the states that has the largest prison and jail population nationally. California is one of the, we think of ourselves, I guess, as like the bellwether state, and we lead the country in our incarceration rate. We have a death row. We're not currently executing people, but we do have hundreds and hundreds of people awaiting execution in California. And a lot of the trends around incarceration nationally come from California. So everyone's looking at what's California doing? And so we've had a really interesting last 10 years or so. I mean, I guess if you look at the last 30 years, it's been really terrifying what's happening in California. And so I think there's this opportunity currently to shift what's happening, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So even though in California we've seen a significant decrease in crime rates, both on property crimes and on violent crimes, we also have seen a very significant growth in the prison population. So this chart doesn't quite get us to current day, but it gives you a sort of a sense of what's happened in California. We've seen around this spike is as we've seen significant terrible policies passed in California, like 3 strikes. We've seen the war on drugs. We've seen a lot of programs that have intentionally targeted certain communities, particularly low-income communities, communities of color, and forced people into the prison system. So I'm 31. So in my since I was born, do any of you have a guess of how many prisons have been built in California in the last 30 years? 100? What else? 100? Okay. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a sense. I'm going to show you the photographs of all of the prisons that have been built in the last 30 years. So starting with Solano, and then we'll go through, and I'm going to ask you all how many universities have been built in California at the same time. These are all prisons. You can see the year that they were opened. Yeah. So these are all prisons that were built in the last 30 years. New prisons. So California has 33 prisons. Our prisons are actually, compared to other states, very large. Our prisons are about triple the size of the prisons of other states. So so I'm from Michigan originally, and we have 52 prisons in Michigan, but our prison population is under 50,000 people, where California has 33 prisons. Our prison population is closer to 125,000 people. So we have these mega prisons in California, as you can see. So any guesses on the number of universities that were built in California during that same time? 1, yeah, I see some hands. So 1 university was built in that same time. So even if you think about the budget as a moral document, thinking about where California's priorities are, it's really significant that we have spent the last 30 years building 22 prisons and 1 university in our state. So to bring us kind of up to what's been happening in the last several years, how many of you have heard, before Paul mentioned it, about the court order on overcrowding in California? Hands. Okay, great. So just as a little bit of background for folks who are newer, so California has had 2 lawsuits, one called the Plata case and one called the Coleman case, and they were brought forward by prisoners in the prison law office. And the cases around overcrowding and health and mental health conditions. And so in the ruling, the originally a 3-judge panel in the state of California ruled that overcrowding was the reason why 1 person a week was dying unnecessarily in California prisons due to inability to access health care and mental health care. That ruling went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court. And so California was given until they were given a, it's been extended multiple times, but they were given about a 3-year period to reduce their prison population from, at the time of the overcrowding, when the lawsuit was like at the height, our prisons were at 200%, 202% capacity, which means a prison that was built for 100 people was housing 200 people. So you saw those pictures before of, there was like triple bunk beds. Those were in classrooms, gymnasiums, hallways. So people were stacked in bunks and then also stacked in the areas where we're supposedly providing rehabilitative programming for people. So our prisons were, you know, jam-packed. They still are pretty packed. So they were given 3 years to reduce the prison population. And there's a couple ways that that can happen. So I think that what we saw was a tremendous amount of fear-mongering. It was that 40,000 happy-go-lucky felons are going to be running around in our streets. But actually, the court order, I mean, CURB would support the release of people from prison, but I think that the media used it as a, you know, as fear tactics to continue to frighten Californians, and then since then, we've seen some of the policies that have been put in place to respond. But so California has a couple ways they can reach the court order. They can, on the front end, stop sending as many people to prison. So that could look like sentencing reform, that could look like alternatives to incarceration, that could look like sending people to treatment for something like a drug addiction or mental health issues as opposed to prison. They can get people out on the back end, so that can be releasing people earlier than maybe their sentence currently allows for. It could be looking at all sorts of populations that might be the most likely to be successful in the community and bringing those people home. So doing things like providing good time credits, other types of parole processes. One avenue that CURB has been pushing is around medical parole. So people who are medically fragile or typically within have been diagnosed with about 6 months to live, having those folks come home and be in the community or with their families. And then the other option is that they can expand the capacity of the system. So if you have a prison built for 100 people, if you add 50 more cells, then you have more capacity. So that's one of the sort of secrets about the court order, is that everyone's like, oh, well, what are we going to do? This release order, and it's not actually a release order, it's a crowding reduction order. So they can expand capacity, and then they can also shuffle people to other cells. So basically, the court order only covers California's state prisons. It doesn't cover county jails. It doesn't cover private prisons. It doesn't cover prisons in other states. So currently, we have 9,600 California prisoners, state prisoners, in private prisons in states like Arizona and Alabama and others. So that close to 10,000 people don't count in the court order, because even though they're California prisoners, they aren't in the 33 prisons that we were talking about. So, so that's one strategy. And then another strategy, what we've seen is what California passed a few years ago, AB 109, which is realignment. How many of you have heard of realignment? Okay, so realignment basically changes criminal justice policy so that if somebody is convicted as of October 1st, 2011, of a non-serious, non-violent crime, instead of being sent to state prison, they're sent to the county jail. And the difference between a prison and a jail is each county has a jail system that is run by the county sheriff, and it's within the county that you live in. So if we were all to go to jail right now, we would all go to Redwood City, to the jail, like the Maple jail. We wouldn't go to that one? Oh, Santa Clara County. Okay, so I don't know what Santa Clara, San Jose. Okay, so San Jose jail. So, and then you typically spend time in your jail, and then you get folks who are in the jail are awaiting trial, or in the past were serving a sentence of 1 year or less. And then if you were sentenced to a year or more, you'd go to state prison. Now, if you're serving any non-serious, non-violent crime, you serve your sentence in the county jail. If you're serving a sentence for something that is more serious, then you would be sent to state prison. And then there are prisons within the state that you can be locked up in. If you get charged with a federal crime, so something like taking narcotics across the border, or do any type of crime like at the U.S. Postal Service, then you'd go to federal prison, and then that system is you could be in any of the prisons in the country that are under federal jurisdiction. Then there's also prisons that are like immigrant detention facilities. Sometimes there's immigrant folks are detained in our county jails, so counties tend to have contracts with ICE that allow them to maintain control of some people before they're deported or sent to the INS system. So under the court order, only the state prisons count. So if we shuffle people to jails or to out of state, that actually goes towards the population reduction. So in California, having passed realignment, we now have non-serious, non-violent folks serving their sentences in the county jails, and we've seen a significant reduction in the number of people in the state prisons. So now where we're at with the court order is the governor had proposed a plan this September, or maybe August. So the deadline for the court order is coming up. It was supposed to be by the end of this month. He'd been given a 6-month extension. It was supposed to be last July or June, but he keeps saying, I need more time, I need more time. We're doing a good faith effort. We've reduced crowding significantly. Conditions are improving, but we can't do this so fast. So the court has given them an extension, and then the governor's plan was to spend $1 billion to send people the remaining, I think to reach the court order, he still has to reduce crowding by the equivalent of 6,500 individuals. So he's going to send those people to out-of-state prisons. So how many of you voted for Proposition 30 about 2 years ago? Do y'all remember Proposition 30? So Proposition 30 was a ballot initiative to increase the sales tax so that we could have more revenue in the state. So that Proposition 30 raised $1.1 billion. So instead of that money being used to restore cuts to education and to, what's happening to our parks and to all of the things that were promised to us under Proposition 30. They may still do those restorations, but they've used the exact same equivalent of money. They've allocated it to ship people out of state. So, what's that? Yeah. Yes, yeah, so it's pretty insane. There's 6,000 people, yeah. Yeah, so it's a pretty expensive plan. Part of that is all of the travel, right? To ship people out of this. Yeah, so they put people on planes, they put them on buses, they have to be escorted by armed guards. There's a whole series of additional costs. I don't actually know why it costs that much, but my sense is really what's fairly frightening is that, again, we always have the money that goes to pay for incarceration. So we just released this comic last week. So the governor released his 2014-2015 budget. He sort of leaked it to the press a couple days early, and the courts were given an extension to the governor until the date of the budget, when the budget was due, which was the 10th, so a couple days ago. He was given until the 10th to come up with the plan. So what had happened was he had passed this $1 billion to send people out of state, and the courts were like, no, 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 you're not going to do that. You're not going to send people out of state. Yeah, oh, there's a mic for people who have questions in the audience, just to make sure that everyone can hear.
Yeah, please wait for me to bring the mic to you. Raise your hand.
Was that cost 1 million with an M or 1 billion with a B?
1 billion. Yeah, 1 billion. So the governor was given until the 10th of January to come up with a new plan, so he wasn't supposed to be shipping people out of state. So he's been kind of playing with the courts, and in the governor's budget, he has prepared sort of 2 strategies to reach the court order. So a lot of you are going to need to be weighing in to your legislators about your feelings about the budget. So basically, the governor, proposal for this year's corrections budget would be, the total budget for corrections would be $9.8 billion. Our budget up until last year was $9.2 billion, so it's a $600 million increase to corrections. And we're seeing that we do have more revenue in this state. We're hoping that that was going to be going towards restorations that we had seen, I think in the last 3 years. We saw 25% of the Health and Human Services budget cut, and we're not seeing that restored in this year's budget. Instead, we're seeing the governor sort of 3 main priorities being to pay down the debt, to create a rainy day fund, and then to meet the court order by spending more on prisons. So so his plan is to ask the court for a 2-year extension on to reduce the population. So in 2 years, his proposal is that within those 2 years, they're going to build 3,500 more prison beds, and they're going to create what they're calling like a recidivism reduction fund. So this is actually something that we do support. And it would then be investing in more reentry services, more programming for people while they're in sort of that last year of their sentence, and have other. Right now, the Recidivism Reduction Fund has no details, so it just sounds good. So my hope is that CURB and our allies will help influence it to look good. But if they don't get the 2-year extension, they're going to spend the Recidivism Reduction Fund to send people to the out-of-state prisons, or to, if the Supreme Court and the 3-judge panel won't allow them to send people out of state, they're going to send them to in-state private prisons or to counties where they have excess jail capacity. Yeah, so it's pretty insane. So basically, what that means is in both directions, they're expanding capacity. So one, immediately, they're going to expand capacity to out-of-state facilities while they're building 3,500 additional beds. And then if they get the 2-year extension, then they'll do some good stuff while they're building the 3,500 extra beds. So I think that they're then estimating that in those 2 years, they could reduce the prison population by 2,000 to 3,000. So some of the things that we did see that were good in the budget was, so CURB and our allies have been pushing for the last, easily the last 10 years for the state to implement some parole and sentencing reform measures that exist in other states. So one is an expansion of medical parole, so making sure that the people that are the most costly to lock up are the people who need to go to the hospital, who need to have medical treatment. Oftentimes that means, similar to that one, your question about the $1 billion, the cost to provide people health care is incredibly high because people have to be escorted to community hospitals by 2 armed guards. They may be so they may not even be able to speak or communicate or move their bodies, but they have to be escorted by guards. And so we're saying let's get all of those people, medically incapacitated people, out of prison, because as people age, we're going to have a growing population of people who are medically incapacitated in our prisons. And then let's expand it to even people who are medically fragile enough that they're not a threat to society, and to be able to provide people health care outside of prison is much more affordable. So we're going to see an expansion to medical parole. We're going to see an elder parole process. So people who are 60 years or older who have served 25 years of their sentence will be eligible for a parole hearing specific to that part of their sentence, and hopefully be able to be released. They'll have some hoops to jump through. And then we're also seeing credits extended for people who are serving a nonviolent second strike. So those people will get, it'll be basically the time that they serve will be sped up. But basically in California now, if you're not serving on a strike, you have eligibility to get good time credits, but strikers don't have these credit options. So we're going to start by giving them the credit options. These are good policies. So we're going to need everybody to weigh in to their legislators to make sure that those policies get passed in the budget this year and that they get expanded to be more broad. So that if all of those reforms pass, starting in around when the budget gets signed, which is over the summer, that would mean that 440 people would be immediately eligible for release. So we need 6,500 more people out of the system. So that's a start. About 500 people is a start, but we think that we could, if we just looked at those three policies and expanded all of them, we could meet the court order. So that's what we're seeing in the budget right now. And I think that, so back to what I was saying a little bit before, we've seen a lot of the fear-mongering in the media contribute to this concept from our legislators that we don't want any early release. So there's been this big fear. We don't want anybody or any early release. And we're saying, actually, we're sending people away for so long. It's not early release. It's like way overdue release. And so wanting to make sure that we're pushing back against that narrative. Here's a couple of the images about realignment. So as I was saying before around this idea of shuffling people around the deck, I think that these images are really helpful in terms of just sort of showing that we're moving the problem from the county jails, from the state prisons to the county jails. So what we've seen as a result of realignment, this piece of just transferring the nonviolent, non-serious people to counties, is we're now seeing, similar to the prison expansion boom that I had talked about in the last 30 years, we're seeing that replicated at the county level. I'm going to pause because I think you have a question and maybe I'm moving to the next portion, so go ahead.
Yes, I have noticed in the newspapers on several occasions descriptions of murderers and rapists being released early, and one of them had the audacity to say that this was to relieve prison overcrowding. The question that comes to my mind, well, there are two questions. One is, if this is just simply literally true and they're not differentiating, why aren't they? And the second is sort of more devious. Is that actually being done to raise public opinion against releasing prisoners?
Yes, so those are two great questions. So first, nobody is being released early based on realignment. So there have been sentencing laws changed. So people who are now realigned to the county has the option to provide what's called split sentencing for people, but it's not an early release measure, it's a sentencing reform measure. So basically that means that the sheriff and the county system can decide how to manage their jail population. And one option is, if say you were serving a 18-month sentence, to sentence somebody to 6 months on community supervised parole, and then the rest of your sentence, if you are successful in the first 6 months of your community supervised parole, then you could serve all of your sentence on that program. If you're not successful, then you would be you'd serve the rest of your sentence in the jail. But that's not an early release measure. But what we have seen is the sheriffs. I would say that if I had to put money on the how much like the sheriff's department and the sheriff's association's communications budget has spent on taking any type of violence or harm that's happened post realignment and spun it so that they can maintain that realignment isn't working, so that they can maintain the resources. I think, right, law enforcement is frightened because the CCPOA is one of the strongest unions. I support unions. I don't support the CCPOA. CCPOA is the Corrections Peace Officers Association, so it's the guards union. They're one of the most powerful forces in the state of California, incredibly powerful lobby, and they're now seeing a significant reduction in power because this 26,000 people have been moved to the county jails, and now they're supervised by the Sheriff's Association. And so the sheriffs are growing in power, and the peace officers are sort of losing power, although they have way more power than I'll ever have. And so in order to maintain power and control, which then means resources to keep the money flowing, we have to keep Californians frightened. And so any violence or harm that's happening is now being associated back to realignment. So anybody who's being, if we have about 10,000 people that come home, I think it's around every year. I mean, thousands of people come home from prison all the time, right? Through how it naturally functions, through parole. So people who have serious or violent felonies come home, and I support that. Actually, there's people who are serving life sentences, people who are serving sentences for first or second degree murder have the lowest recidivism rate of any population of people coming home from prison. And part of that is people typically were part of like a one-time serious violent act and not part of a lifetime or a lifespan of maybe drug addiction or property crimes. And so we've sort of frightened Californians to believe that we don't want to release people who have murder convictions. And I actually spent my career prior to working for CURB working on getting domestic violence survivors who had killed abusive partners out of prison. So murderers, right? So I've spent a lot of time working with people who've killed folks, trying to bring them home. And they actually tend to be, the most successful at reentry. So I think that we've seen the framing in the media and the Sheriff's Association using all of the violence and harm that's going to continue to happen in our communities to continue to line their pockets. And I think that part of what we're saying is until we come up with solutions that actually address the root cause of violence, if we start addressing poverty, California has the highest poverty rate in the nation. If we address poverty, then we could be impacting public safety. So if people had affordable homes to live in, if people had jobs, we will see a significant reduction in violence and harm in our communities. But by putting people in cages, we're not going to see a reduction. So I think on everyone's chairs, we have some information about San Mateo. And so San Mateo is following a similar trend to what we've been seeing in other counties. Since realignment, we have out of the 64 counties in California, we're seeing 42 of those counties trying to build out their jail capacity. So they're trying to now add new jail beds or build new jails at the county level. So we're seeing a similar trend to what we'd seen at the state level. And so I know I'm learning now we're not in San Mateo County, so in Santa Clara County. You all aren't building, but San Mateo, just up the road, they are one of the more terrifying counties, in my opinion, because they actually see themselves as reformists. They want to do the right thing. Unlike LA, where CURB is also fighting. LA is trying to build a $1.4 billion jail expansion. They want to just lock up anybody they possibly can. Sheriff Baca has been in the news because his jails are incredibly violent. He's being indicted. He just retired. He's a fun one to go up against for us. We've had a good time with Sheriff Baco. I've also had a really good time with Sheriff Monks in San Mateo. So, so just as a sense of what this looks like is the counties, again, are trying to build. So San Mateo is trying to build a new jail that's going to cost, I think they've earmarked it to around $160 million to build, $30 to $50 million a year to operate. So that's to staff it, to have food coming, to have, you know, water and other resources coming to it. And then what I was saying about it being a frightening plan is what we're seeing. In order for sheriffs to maintain the resources, they're kind of trying to change their image, because I think that as advocates and organizers, we have been successful at saying that locking up people and throwing away the key isn't working. So now what we're seeing is, in order to make jail expansion palatable, we're seeing that the counties are saying, well, we need new jail space so that we can provide drug treatment, so that we can provide programming. That sounds great, doesn't it? It sounds good. However, we don't need that programming space to also mean 500 new cells. So we're saying, yeah, I totally support resources going towards providing programming in jails, but I don't think we need to build out jail capacity in order to do that. We need to reduce the current jail population and then repurpose the existing space so that we can provide services. We're pretty terrified that at this point, if you're a low-income person, that in order to get access to social services, you're gonna have to get a felony conviction so that you can get drug treatment. You're gonna have a felony conviction so that you can get mental health services. And so that's part of this like slightly frightening new way that the sheriffs are defining themselves. So for example, if we were gonna reduce the population of people in jail. So currently in San Mateo County, which is very similar to the rest of the state, 76% of the people in jail are pretrial. So that means they haven't been sentenced yet. It's typically people who are too poor to be able to get access to pay their bail. So folks who may be able to go home and be with their families, stay in their job, stay in their house, continue their car payments, take care of their dog, are having to serve that time in the jail. So that's 76% of the jail population is pretrial, so haven't even been sentenced for the crime. So one easy place to start is bail reform. If we provided access to people who can't afford bail, access to bail, we would have a lot of room to provide education and services and other programs to people in our jails. What we've seen in San Mateo, actually, so there's a couple avenues for money, and I have a couple of, I bring a lot of handouts, and it's really only for people who really want them, so you're welcome to have one. I brought enough for everybody, but this one is who is paying for jail construction in California, so I'll pass it around. If you want one, have it, otherwise I'll save them for the next time. These are the legislative bills that are funneling money to the counties for jail construction. In order for counties to be eligible for that money, one of the criteria that they had to demonstrate was that they had to prove that their jail was overcrowded. So since San Mateo was denied money for jail expansion, what we've seen is a significant reduction in pretrial release. We've seen an increase in ICE detention. We've seen an increase of keeping people in the jail as long as possible to drive up the crowding numbers. So it's a pretty terrifying game in terms of like how much power and ability to play with people's lives the sheriff has. He has the option to implement split sentencing, to have more people in community programs, but he needs overcrowding numbers to be able to get the money. And then another thing that we're seeing is this idea of the jails being built and they're being called gender responsive jails. So jails that are basically sort of like boutique or have nice curtains and are being built for women. So they're not as hard as the current jails. They're going to be more friendly for families and children. Again, it's one of these ways to make it palatable to build a new jail. And so we're saying actually a jail is a jail, even if it's got curtains on it, it's a jail, because at the end of the day, those women are not able to return home to their children. Even if there's a really nice day room for the kids to visit in, those children are having to see their mother in jail. So if you want to be providing programs in the county that are going to be supportive of families, why not provide all those women that bail money so that they can go be with their kids? So we're seeing this idea of, you know, this gender responsive jail is another one of the trends that are being used to make it, I don't know, cost effective, like make it seem cost effective, make it seem like they're doing the right thing, and help fool voters and local folks on, you know, why we need the jail. So you all on your chairs have, I think there's two sides. I actually realized that what I gave Paul weren't double-sided, but there's 10 reasons to fight the new jail in San Mateo County and 10 alternatives to the new jail. So some of you probably have alternatives on your seat, some of you have reasons. So there's more, I think, if you want to. So there's the reasons to fight and alternatives to the jail. And these are just a little bit of the specifics around what's happening in the county. And a few things I just wanted to point out were some of the pieces around just thinking about like the race and class based lockup. So black people make up 24% of the jail population, even though they comprise only 3% of county residents. And similarly, Latino folks make up 25% of the jail population and only comprise 26% of the county residents. So one of the things that we're seeing is a tremendous amount of communities of color being locked up. And what's happening in San Mateo is the same as happening in the rest of California and the rest of the nation. Let's see, some of the other things that are just worth noting is that 35 to 40% of the jail population have mental illness. And the county, so San Mateo's county-owned health system states that research evidence is strong that despite the best treatment that can be provided while people are in custody, people with mental illness do not get better in institutions, particularly in jails, which tends to be difficult even for people without mental illness. So what we've seen is we've seen a lot of our institutions that treat mental illness closed. At the same time, we saw those jails and prisons getting built. And so we're seeing a significant amount of people with mental illness in the jails. And so we're seeing jails now be the place where, as I was saying before, where people are being able to access programs. And we need to continue to create community pressure that we need to be providing those services outside of the jail. So I have Natalie with me, who currently is living in New York, but is from San Mateo County originally, and was part of the fight in San Mateo on the jail. And since I work statewide and I'm in Oakland, I find it helpful to have people who are more local talk to folks about why they're involved in fighting prison and jail expansion. And she's continued her fight in New York and is fighting a jail there. But wanted to just give you all a little bit more of a local perspective on why somebody is fighting. So she's going to talk for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to go back and then give you all a little bit more, and then we'll open it up for question and answers. So why don't I give you that mic.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie. I've lived in Redwood City forever. I was born in Redwood Shores, and I was there back when Marine World was still there. So, yeah, I think Emily provided a pretty awesome summary. I got involved with resisting prison and jail expansions a little more than a year ago, and I was sort of the point person working with CURB and critical resistance in against the expansion of the San Mateo County Jail. I think the reason I first got involved was because it's such a fast-changing environment. I'm sure, as you can all see, the landscape is rapidly gentrifying with sort of the expansion of Silicon Valley and people moving into Redwood City particularly. Having the chance to organize was kind of opened my eyes on two major fronts. Firstly, it helped me see how we can be incredibly isolated in our little neighborhoods here and not really understand what's going on with our neighbors. Can you hear me? Okay, just making sure. And also, it helped me understand some strategies for resistance. I hadn't really gotten out there and sort of hit the pavement and done real activist work before getting in touch with Emily and other folks. and it was really great to see how you can actually hold people accountable. Like you can actually make connections and start to learn what's going on around you just by simply showing up and having a sign and having really productive conversations. In a place like Redwood City, where in my opinion there's not much activism, getting out there with a few people and a sign is much more visible than other environments. So I think it has a lot of merit and a lot of potential for that reason. Yeah, Emily provided an awesome summary, but I think something to focus on is the framing of this particular jail. I mean, in the national landscape, the discussion about prisons is, you know, it's entering mainstream awareness in a really important way. And it seems like we are faced with a sort of tipping point. Like, people don't know what exactly is going to happen. People more and more don't want to see their money be going in this direction. And people are more, like, they're becoming more aware of the sort of like moral, practical, and logistical costs of investing in jails rather than sort of like educational infrastructure or like things that improve the community. So in Redwood City, the way that it's being framed by the sheriff's department as like a socially and environmentally responsible jail totally undermines, and in my opinion, like diverts attention away from the real issues. And it's also like incredibly blatant hypocrisy. For instance, one of the things that we organized against was the fact that the new Redwood City Jail is being built on a street that is called One Chemical Way, because it was used as a dumping grounds for chemicals for local corporations for about 20 years or so, maybe longer. And there wasn't like sufficient attention. There wasn't sufficient attention to that fact. So we were discussing this as an environmentally racist jail because it kind of like forces people to live in an environment that is not healthy. What else? And then also what Emily was mentioning about the women's jail, that in my opinion also kind of veils, to extend the metaphor of the curtains, veils the real issues that women are sort of uniquely impacted by, or it's more pronounced in women's correctional facilities, like instances of sexual assault, medical neglect. These are things that we should be discussing about in women's facilities. Yes. I'm so sorry. That's done. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I was actually at the end.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to wrap us up so we have time for questions. So this is just a quick graph that shows you the difference between how much it costs to have somebody in a community-based substance abuse treatment program or on a surveillance-oriented program in the community, so like an electronic monitoring device. CURB doesn't support those services, but it's an option. It's still cheaper than putting people in a cage. So then what it means to be in a cage and the price tag is at the end there. Here's just some photos of some of the organizing that's happened specifically in San Mateo. We were fighting against the Measure A that was on the ballot, which was a sales tax that we were seeing was going to be invested in the jail. And as Natalie was saying, they're trying to say that the jail is going to be a green, socially responsible, LEED certified jail, but it's going to be built on a toxic waste site. So we tried to talk about that. So these are just some of the images of the really fantastic organizing. Right now in San Mateo, we're a little bit on hold in terms of the jail pattern. The county is waiting actually until on the 16th. There's going to be in Los Angeles, the board that distributes the money for jail expansion is going to be granting money on the 16th. In the meantime, we've also locally been doing a ton of fighting against San Francisco's plan to build a new jail. So we have a town hall and then a big mobilization to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. So folks who want to do solidarity work, we would love to have people turn out. They're trying to, they have a seismically unfit or unsafe jail, and so they want to close it and rebuild a new one, and then turn it into a homeless shelter. So turn the unsafe jail. They're gonna just take the prisoners out of it and then make it into a homeless shelter. It's terrifying. And then I think that's all I've got. And then I've got a couple more things to just hand around while you all ask questions. One is our petition, which is a petition that's against prison and jail expansion in the state. And we've been using this to, when we go to supervisors, when we go to legislators, and then also to help keep people posted based on your zip code on actions related to maybe we might be targeting your specific legislator, and then we'll keep people posted. So if you want to sign it, we'd love that. I think we've gotten over 7,000 signatures so far, and we're hoping to get 20,000. And if you want to take them anywhere else in your life to circulate, we'd love that. Then in terms of, if anybody is interested in getting plugged into what's happening in San Francisco or know people in San Francisco, I have these green handouts. They're not quite as nice as the San Mateo one, but I have some up here if people want them. And then we have these, I also have some talking points for folks who are interested in more of the specific arguments about how to fight jail expansion. We call it how to debunk your sheriff's justification for jail expansion. So we've got a whole series of talking points for folks who are interested in turning out to do like local lobbying of supervisors or to speak to legislators. We've got talking points, and then at the front table we have one of our posters that's in English and in Spanish that's part of the amazing resistance of people organizing. If people want to have these in it, you can have them, and they're a good way to help people get plugged into the fight. So why don't I open it up for questions? And then there's a mic. Oh, thank you. And then we have until 12:15, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Maybe a few minutes longer.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. This is all very interesting. I've been sitting here trying to think, why does the United States of America have so many more people in prison than anybody else in the world? Do you think it has anything to do with the fact the country was founded by Puritans, and they had, and they were a lot stricter about who should be sent to jail? I mean, when did this change? Has it always been more than the rest of the world, or can we identify an area? Has it anything to do with religion?
So I think it has, there's a lot of factors, but one of the things that we try to talk about often is as we ended slavery in the United States, we then created criminalization that then impacts the same communities that we were enslaving. And if you watch the rise of the sentencing laws and the growth of the prison system, it's really the nexus of as we've abolished slavery, that's when we've started to see the increase in the prison system. And I think that's fairly significant in terms of if we look at how much of the process of criminalization is criminalizing the economies that communities of color and low-income communities have used to be operating outside of the traditional economy. If people don't have access to jobs and they're selling drugs, then we criminalize selling drugs. And then if we legalize something like marijuana, those jobs then don't go to the communities that need them most. So and then we further criminalize folks that are then in our prisons.
So
yeah.
Sandy here is taking a list of people with questions.
Great.
So get her eye, not mine. I'm following her direction to my right here. We've got already 10 people on the list, so wow. 10 minutes left. So if you can adjust your answers accordingly.
I'll be quick, yeah.
Thanks. I just had a couple quick questions. One is, has there been any talk about revising the 3 strikes law, for example, to say all 3 strikes have to be violent crimes or something like that? And then my second question is, if marijuana is legalized, how big of an effect will that have on reducing the prison population? And would either of those things be retroactive? So if somebody was in jail now because of old laws, if the laws are changed, would they be released? Thanks.
Yeah, so Proposition 36, which was passed a year and a half or so ago, made it so that the third strike had to be serious or violent, and it was retroactive, and we've seen about 3,000 people come home from prison, which has been amazing. A lot of really incredible women that I work with, their husbands and sons have been coming out of prison. It's been so great. And so I think that I think that 3 strikes there'll be the sort of argument of we need to see how this goes before we continue to cut away at it, but I think there is some movement that should be an option. I think that in terms of the felonies around drug possession, there was a bill that made it to the governor's desk this year, which would have turned any drug felony for possession of a small amount of drugs into a misdemeanor. Right now it's called a wobbler. It can be sentenced as either a felony or a misdemeanor based on the judge's discretion, and that would have reduced the prison population, if retroactively applied, by 9,000 people. That's more than just marijuana. It would be other substances as well, but I think that not a lot of people go to prison for marijuana possession. It would be more marijuana, like trafficking, selling, etc. So I don't think that is as big of a number, but I think that any efforts to decriminalize are, especially, I mean, a lot of the population of people in prison are related to drug crimes, whether it's use or, maybe stealing a TV to fuel a drug habit. So I think that if we look at decriminalization, that'll be significant. There's a lot of hesitance by the legislature to put things retroactively, which is why I'm here to speak to you all to continue to put pressure on our legislators to say that we support those kind of reforms.
Welcome to Gulag, California.
Yes.
I seem to think that we used to criticize the Soviet Union for exactly this. My question is, are the petitions county-based? In other words, do you have to live in Santa Clara County or San Mateo County, or?
They're not. So how it works is it's a California-based petition, and then we enter the information into our database. And so then if we're targeting a legislator, we would then print them out based on zip code for the right people. So as long as you sign it, we'll upload the information to where we need it. So, yeah.
Hi, thanks. Great talk. Couple things. I'll try to make it quick. You said CURB does not support at-home monitoring. Can you explain why?
Yeah. So our fear is that as we, so CURB is a coalition, so coalition members may support the use of electronic monitoring. We do have some groups in our coalition that are abolitionists, so they don't believe in any use of, locking folks up as a means to respond to violence and harm. And so then something like electronic monitoring would fall into that, because our fear is that as we stop using cages in prisons and jails as the means to incarcerate people, we're then going to be locking them up in their homes and communities. And so it extends surveillance into not just that individual's home, but their entire family.
So do abolitionists not believe that there are any people who pose a threat to society? And or do they believe the mental health system should be reformed to allow that, since it's been reformed to make it basically impossible to keep somebody institutionalized against their will? How do you square that circle?
Yeah. So I think that so I'm an abolitionist. I don't believe that we should be locking people up, and I'm happy to talk to people about that over lunch if you'd like to get into it a little bit more. I think the idea is that if we were to over time start to decarcerate, to reinvest our resources, then we would eventually end up with a population of people that are the ones that we're most afraid of in prison, right? And then we could actually really invest in our resources to figure out how to respond to that violence and harm in more effective ways. So again, the women that I was talking about that I've worked with earlier, they're the best teachers to people who are currently in domestic violence situations to prevent them from being in the same pattern. So I think that there may be a population of people that we might need to provide intensive treatment to, but we don't believe that the response to that is to put people in cages. And we could be coming up with much more humane solutions to figuring out how to, even if we may need to segregate people from the population in some way, I don't believe that the way we're doing it now is the best option. So, yes.
I have the mic. I'm a retired nurse, and I'm retired from the state of California Department of Health. I was a union steward. I was very active in my union. I was a steward, and as a steward, I went to statewide SEIU meetings for people in Local 1000. Among many of the attendees were nurses in the prisons. So I really feel very comfortable in saying what I'm going to say because I spoke to the people who are truly on the front line. Two points. One is, and I'm picturing these conversations, is the ability of prisoners to fake mental illness. It's very easy for anybody who's smart, and prisoners, by the way, are very smart because they've conned the system in many, many ways for years. And so they're very adept at faking mental illness. And that's something I don't think can be ignored. And it can't be ignored because the prisons don't, the PLATA thing is the medical care delivered to prisoners, and that includes mental health workers, whether they're non-nurses or nurses or psychiatrists, and it's severely lacking. So decisions aren't always made by well-educated, mentally funded people. And the second thing is, I just want to recite one incident that happened to me. I was my job in the state was to inspect nursing homes, and I was called on a complaint in a nursing home in East San Jose because a man who had had a stroke was in a wheelchair but had use of one arm, one leg, and could talk, managed to molest in a nursing home 3 Alzheimer's women. And that was a very scary complaint for me. So I just leave you with that.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid lunch is ready and going cold. So are you here are you staying with us for lunch?
I'm staying for lunch, yes.
Then
yeah,
you'll be glad to answer questions,
Great.
hopefully. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.